This is the Two Marketeers Podcast, where hosts and marketing experts Sean Patrick and Lindsay Waugh seek to uncover what makes brands so powerful in how they impact modern society and culture.
Two Marketeers. They've got a podcast. The Two Marketeers Podcast.
Hello. Hi.
Hello, woman.
Hello, woman supporter.
Supporter?
Is that a bra? Hello, bra.
It's from that movie Grease. If you can't be an athlete, be an athletic supporter.
Yes. Hello, ally to women everywhere on International Women's Day 2023.
Lindsay got on the call and she said, do you realize today is Women's Day? And I was like, I do, thanks to my favorite brand. I don't know if this will appear backwards. I never understand mirroring.
No, it looks good to me. Starbucks saying Happy International Women's Day.
Yeah, handwritten on my cup along the curve of the logo is Happy Women's Day. I mean, that's a lot to write.
Happy Women's Day. I know, it was so sweet this morning. I have two girls, two daughters, and the littlest one was like, Mom, am I a woman? And I was like, you are a woman. She's like, I'm a woman. I was like, hear you roar. Yeah, hear you roar. And then we blasted Katy Perry all the way to school. Yeah, and Shania Twain and Beyonce, who runs the world. Like we are all up in International Women's Day today.
Taylor Swift also runs the world.
Yeah.
She's top of my list.
Love her. Okay, so what are we up to today? What were we going to do today?
You know, more and more, Lindsay and I are trying to let the spark of the next topic be timely based on something we experience, right? Like something that happens to us wherever possible. That with a mix of, really interesting stuff that's happened in the world that's really affecting society and culture. In this case, it's the whole story around Netflix, and in Canada and other test markets, not the US, although in the US there's a lot of buzz around it coming. They were essentially changing their policy is how it comes out, and in so doing, making the consumer have to adjust or adapt.
Mm-hmm. And can we say that they were just trying to crack down on account sharing?
Yes. But what's interesting is the reason I say it's a policy change is they make it sound like account sharing. They addressed it as if it was against the rules, and it wasn't. They didn't get into the sort of understanding of, well, in this day and age, having one residence, one primary account is debatable.
Yeah, 100%. Because they were making you set your primary location so they could try and track your account.
Yeah. All I can say after much research, TBD, because February 21st was supposed to be when it all happened. And as a consumer, some of the stuff started happening. Like we did set our primary account.
Oh, you did?
Well,
I still didn't, because I was like, I don't know, I'm too nervous about
this. Simone's talk about face your fears. She just said, okay, well, let's do this and we'll deal with it later.
Well, good for her, ripping off the Band-Aid.
Yeah, that's her. Nothing has happened. The news has pretty much gone silent since early February when it was first announced, other than a general message of it was miscommunicated. We'll get back to you.
Right. Yeah, so we were kind of waiting for that update. We talked about talking about this in February, like Sean said, and we were just saying, okay, but let's wait until the switch is flicked so that we can figure out what happens now. I haven't heard anything at all.
That's the crickets. Yeah. Very digital.
Yeah, crickets. Yeah, so I'm like, well, we don't know what happened.
Yeah. I won't let it go, but the last thing we want to do is provide you guys with misinformation. I think it will be a great case study. Again, this is not to slam Netflix. This is about learning about the mistakes we all make, and it'll be really interesting to see how it all pans out. And I look forward to that panning out and just kind of saying, okay, lessons learned, because there was just some sort of, what I would say is, as a consumer and as a marketing guy, when it was happening, I'm talking to my family like a marketer, and they're like, it's just, Dad, this just fucking sucks. That's all that matters. And I'm like, but, so from a user experience and a brand trust and loyalty, there were some interesting moves. What I will say is that's the beauty of a brand. When you have a strong brand, you have to listen and you have to react and you have to adapt. And the way I'm seeing it is they're adapting. And what they come out with will have to be really good. And it will probably mean a big change for them. I look forward to seeing what that means.
Yeah. Adapting, but currently not communicating. Because they're like, this is going to happen. And then they're like, They didn't even say never mind. Like, they just didn't say anything at all. Like, currently have said nothing. Is silence better than saying something? TBD on that.
They blockbustered is what they did.
Yeah, that's quotable. Okay, let's pivot to our real topic for the day. So there's been some interesting kind of chatter going on in the beauty space. And I was reading just some things about it because I'm always curious about the beauty space. I've worked in beauty and strategy for quite some time. So I kind of follow it just as a personal passion, but there's some interesting insights coming out about Gen Z and beauty specifically. Sean and I get into Gen Z in a bunch of our episodes, and I'm wondering to myself if this happens as you age, that you see these new generations coming up with different behaviors, kids these days, different behaviors than yours, where initially you're like, get out of here with your new behaviors and your values, that you're not spending money and you're practical. But then as time unfolds, you start to become like more in love with the changes that these new generations are making, because they're righting some of the things in the world that may have been wrong in past decades. Do you think that happens? That initially you're turned off and then you fall in love with the changes they're making?
Yes, but I wonder if it is specifically because it's Gen Z we're talking about.
Well, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
Like, am I falling in love with them because I'm a millennial and they're making some changes that I personally feel like need to be made, and perhaps my generation didn't do it, and they're actually taking some real action against this stuff, and now I'm in love with them?
Yes. In this case, I think we're accepting it much quicker because they have much higher morals than we ever did.
Who knew we needed morals?
And here I thought I was just a really good parent because I have 3 awesome Gen Z children. And I just think, wow, what did I do to make these wonderful children? And
turns out nothing.
I have to give yours. I have to give credit to society and culture and all the shit that's been happening.
And to them for actually like taking action on things that need to be. No, we're not giving credit to them. Okay. So I shared on LinkedIn, I think it was last week. Honestly, every day is a blur at this point. This article from a company called Well and Good. So their website is wellandgood.com, which now I just love this website. And the title of this article was "The Glossy Wellness Industry is Getting a Dose of Gen Z Realness." And I was like, yeah, because I came up in school in fashion. Like, my favorite job I ever had was working at Sephora in university when they opened their first store in the Eaton Center in Toronto. And so I've been like all up in the beauty and fashion industry for a long time, and I love it. But there's a lot of flaws in the perfection, in the glossiness of it, in these unrealistic expectations. And so I was reading this article, and it really took an approach to highlight this gap that they talk about between the wellness industry and actual well-being of people.
Yeah.
So you can clearly see that in makeup, in cosmetics, in fashion, in beauty, that there's a gap between what people want to sell you and what actual well-being means for you as a person.
So you're saying wellness represents the industry, well-being represents what Gen Z are seeking.
Yes.
Okay.
So it's almost like the industry is selling the shiny notion of wellness, where Gen Z is a new generation that's really bringing to life, like, is that wellness, or what does well-being actually mean for me as a person?
Yes.
And so in this article, they were talking about how Gen Z is kind of taking a stance against this glossy, fake, vision of perfection that's been projected by the wellness industry for a long time. And we've talked about the wellness industrial complex before. And they say in the article they're going from glossy to messy, but it's not messy in a bad way. It's messy in like this notion of real, authentic, chaotic imperfection that actually is perfection.
Right. Perfection to them is beauty beyond the just your look or your style.
Yeah, and it's not like mold me into a Kate Moss supermodel, which is like what we always wanted to be. Like as kids, you saw this like glamorous notion of beauty and fashion and all of those different things. And I think Gen Z is really bringing that real approach where they're saying that's not wellness, that's not well-being, like having those images of perfection, you know, cast onto you and have it be a standard that you have to live up to is not real. We want to see real people. We want to see authenticity, and we want to see what I actually look like in advertising and beauty product development and fashion and all of those different things. This is where Gen Z starts to be like really cool to me, in that we just tried to live up to it and they're saying no fucking way, like we're not doing it.
Yeah. It's a tricky conversation. I want to be careful that we're not saying Gen Z are like this. And do you know what I mean? Like there is still a lot of glossy. There is still an aspect of that. I think it's the terms on which they decide to do it. I think to compare it was you had one, maybe two images to aspire to when you were a teenager.
Yeah.
And now the diversity and all that's happening is you have so many more options, and you are aware of what kind of options are out there, or you're constantly seeking new options if it just doesn't fit for you. And so much has changed over the last couple of years with race, with pandemic, all economy, that they're almost like that tossed salad we say as Toronto, where they're just thrown in together and they're just all looking for something to hang on to. So what's interesting is I think there's so many different styles because of what you said, Lindsay. You don't conform to be one person. You take a bit of whatever you like for a lot of them. That's at least what they want to do.
That's such a critical point, because then yesterday I'm reading this one article where it's like everyone wants to be real and authentic, and then I was reading a trend report yesterday that was talking about beauty as part of it as well, and they were saying that there's also like a big shift towards like creativity and expression, and cosmetics and fashion are obviously a big way for people to do that. So it's not to say that people aren't putting makeup on their faces because they want to look real. It's that their choice of perfection is their choice. It's not that they're trying to live up to one Barbie doll mold standard. It's to say, sure, like I want things to be real and authentic, but it doesn't mean I'm not going to express creativity in the makeup that I choose and wear, and the way that I dress, and all of those different things. It's not to say we're now all going clean and natural. It's to say that your choice of perfection is your choice. And they're standing up for that.
Yes. And I think Gen Z, they're great. And, I give them full credit. They're fascinating. It's enlightening. It's hopeful. But where does it come from? That's what makes them so fascinating, is what they've faced, what has like any generation, what has particularly happened as they were being formed as human beings. It depends on the person. It depends on what they were exposed to.
Yeah, that's true.
What I love about it though is, let's talk about it, is how has that affected beauty, and beauty as a representation of how they want to be seen. Not perfection. I think that's what's really different. Beauty to them is a lot more about the two things you talked about: mental health and well-being.
Yeah, I think I read a stat the other day that said the average Gen Z is on TikTok 4 hours a day.
So with that though, is they're constantly looking to be influenced. I think that's the difference. They're constantly seeking options of how they can be influenced.
Like
They're
subconsciously?
Yes. I believe that generation is seeking options on how to be influenced and where.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, because I think they're curious about other people. Like when we were curious about other people, we would buy a magazine and like read art,
Yeah.
read articles, like 17 magazine. And it was like,
Right.
that was such a one view of what teenage life was like and what people are like. And now you can be on TikTok for 4 hours a day and see such a variety in the way that people experience life, not only from like how they look, but their perspective on well-being, different cultures, different countries, like the global view of what people are like now is so fascinating. It's almost like they're curating their approach to lifestyle and to
Yes.
their look. And I was reading something yesterday. I'm doing some work for like a luxury brand, and we're talking about how luxury is no longer just expensive. It's like this notion of curation. Like you're wearing a $40 Nike t-shirt with a $3,000 Balenciaga bag, and it's that curation is the expression of their lifestyle and how they want to be viewed. It's not like this singular pillar of what beauty and fashion is supposed to be.
Yeah. And I think what's really interesting too economically is, they're a result of all the stuff that the pandemic did. The thrifting, we've talked about the thrifting, but it's about how they procured it versus what they procured.
Right.
And blatantly so. Like, why is my daughter wearing a hunting t-shirt from 1982 with a giant deer on it? It says something about them in an anti-brand sort of way.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
it's really interesting.
It's so true. It's like how people are wearing like Kirkland signature sweatshirts around,
Yeah.
Like when did Costco become the thing you wanted to be plastered on your crew neck?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's really interesting. I think the same goes for like beauty and cosmetics and things like that as well. Like they're curating the way that they want to look. So when you're looking at all of these different pieces of content on TikTok and things like that, it's not to say that they're looking for just like real and authentic, but when they take the pieces of the things that they see and create their own look and how they want to be viewed by the world, to them, that's realness and authenticity in the way they've curated how they present themselves versus it being like clean beauty and no makeup. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I wonder sometimes, when you think of teenage, right? Teenage years, they're so formative, is like you said, the whole thought of messy and the to them beauty is more about well-being. And like you said, is there a gap? I think there is, but I think the brands that are filling that gap are doing it in very innovative ways.
Mm-hmm.
And they would be arguably not beauty products. Like you've got skincare. For them, skincare is acne.
Right.
And acne was to be hidden. Now, a lot of brands carry these sort of little star stickers or whatever that are colored, and they just conceal it. But they're also, I think a lot of them are just actually treating it as well. But
that point you just said is critical though, because I read that yesterday as well, where it's like, it's not something to be hidden and people are not something to be covered up and like made to all look the same. It's something to be treated as a life that we're going through and dealing with.
Right. And this is how I'm dealing with it. I'm not ashamed. We all have zits. I just don't want you to see what's under here. But it's a zit.
Right. And it's treating it like they're treating it. You see people all over TikTok with those little stars on their face.
So one of the things I found was a top 10 list of the top Gen Z brands. It wasn't, as I understand it, it wasn't category. It was overall. Okay. I'm not going to go into the brands, but what they all were in if there was a category, it would be self-care.
Okay. So
the self-care, it really reinforced something that the general message is a lot of the top brands are beauty or skincare. It's not gender-based. It's not gender-based. It's overall. But the majority of them are considered self-care products. And from that, I think what's really important is what they're saying generally about the difference is the key difference to beauty to them is beauty to them includes mind and body, well-being. It's not body image, it's wellness, it's health, I would say. So that's there to them, beauty is the sum of those things, but also I care about how this gets made. I care about what this brand does. So it's so brand is so important to them in that case.
And I think a lot of that was spurred by the pandemic too, when everyone was inside only being able to reflect on themselves. And there were some tidal kind of shifts in culture that took place then, where pre-pandemic, there was still a lot of value in what you put forward externally. So like status and expensive things and fashion and all of those things. And when pandemic hit, a lot of those values shifted for people, especially younger generations, to health, but health on the inside, like those different types of things. And that's carried on, where people are less concerned with status symbol and glossy beauty and that representation of themselves, but value more those internal values like self-discovery and care.
Yeah, and even the term beauty will be interesting as a category.
Because what is that? What is that?
And I think when you talk about things like achieving aspirational and achieving perfection, hey, it's cosmetics. I don't think that industry is going to blow up anytime soon. If anything, there's a lot. It's probably one of the largest growth segments. Not to mention that Gen Z is about, I think, a third. Anyways, I'm making it up, but it was a fifth or a third of the market, of the global market. So they're going to be marketed to. There is going to be money put into that. Hopefully that money is in being a better product, being a better brand so that they accept you. But this is not an industry that's going to go away. But I think sociologically, it's really this whole discussion is around, it'll be really interesting because I don't think beauty has experienced what it's about to experience in, say, the next 5 years in a very long time.
If ever.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't know, right? Like, I just mean in the century, like beauty has been about covering, hiding, beautifying,
and
misrepresenting. Yeah,
like,
and looking like a particular person. Yeah,
there's no way that we're going back to that cookie cutter uniform notion of beauty. And I don't think Gen Z as a generation or the generation that comes after that would ever enable that to happen. So it'll be interesting to see what that representation of beauty ends up looking like in, in future generations.
I wonder, I mean, you go on Instagram, you're going to see some of that sort of, maybe the more negative side of things. Lindsay, I'm calling out that Dove episode we did last year about detoxifying the conversation.
Right. The pressure is still there.
Yeah, but there is this awareness, and it's very refreshing because I think the pressure has always been there to some degree, like multi-generational. It's just now it's being called out, like you said, not fucking doing it, taking a stance to say no more.
There's the exposure side of it too, where like real people are exposing the fakeness of what goes on in social media, in the industry, where there's this trend going on TikTok right now that I can't get enough of. It's this beauty filter, like obviously makes you look hella perfect, like men with plumped up lips and like all this stuff. And everyone's like, this is what I look like to you after 3 glasses of wine. And then they turn the filter off and they're like, and then you wake up in the morning and they're like, sorry about the farts. So it's like literally the comparison of like with this filter, which a lot of people use those filters on TikTok. Like people don't look like that,
Yeah.
So there's a lot of that exposure and people calling the BS on the filters and social and fakeness and industry. Yeah. So that's a great movement to be happening because you pop on those apps and you're on it all the time and you do start to think that, why don't I just look like that?
Yeah, well, here's an example. Like a lot of people my age are doing it. Got men and women saying, look, and they're honest about like, look how great it is. It's got to make you feel bad. Like if I did it, I mean, it would have to do extra work. I'd have to pay extra. But if I did it, all it would do to me is make me feel worse about myself.
Well, that's what they say, because the other people were doing it as well. Like, oh, this is what I look like as a teenager. And it's like, well, I didn't even look like that as a teenager. I didn't look that. I didn't. Just because I'm now 41 doesn't mean I looked like Kate Moss at 17. Like, so it's even just that unreal standard of what youth is.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
I have one last question for you before we go.
Sure. Let's do it.
They are all about Y2K, the whole Y2K movement of Gen Z. Is that anything you've heard about?
In what way? Like, get into it further.
So it is the big trend. It's taking, and we all do it, right? We all go to sort of prior times, but a big driver is the boldness, the sort of almost silliness of the Y2K era.
Mm-hmm.
I think what's interesting is to say, what was it about the 80s? Why do I keep saying the 80s? That was my Y2K.
Well, it's a very similar look.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which is, yeah. So there's comfort. And you said this before, there's comfort in nostalgia. And maybe it's the thrift thing too, right?
Mm-hmm.
The kind of thrift they'd be getting is probably Y2K time period.
Yeah.
They seek escape. It's an escapism is what they're saying to Y2K era.
Well, I think it's not even just escape. I think the boldness and the brightness of the colors and the silly trends and the almost childlike accessories and, things like that there's a shift taking place right now with something called the joy economy, where people are so overburdened with a lot of heaviness. So there's a million issues that we need to be tackling. Gen Z in particular is very tapped into issues and ethics and their values and how brands show up with that there's this desire for lightness where all of this heaviness is constantly on people's shoulders. So
Right.
I think there's been a shift in fashion and cosmetics to showcase some of that lightness. Like, I'm going to lean into things that can be fun, whether it's events, whether it's fashion, whether it's makeup, whether it's bold and silly. It's a fun expression because I have that desire for joy, perhaps a bit of escapism when things tend to feel a bit too much.
That is so bang on. I think it's known historically as a time where fashion was just for the sake of fashion. It wasn't necessarily responding to specific issues.
Right.
It really solidifies what you said, is there's just this sort of joyfulness.
I think we need to find joy where we can find it.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of other things that we need to be thinking about. So if fashion and beauty can be an expression of joy and a fun playground for people to use to express themselves, I think that's why a lot of Gen Z are leaning into that.
Yeah, I love that word. I think playground is a word. We've used it last week. We're using it this week. Playground seems to be the new marketplace, right?
Yeah,
They're looking for playgrounds, and joy is a great word. Thanks for ending with that. Very wise insight.
But I would say, when they say real, it's not necessarily just clean beauty. When they say authentic, what does that mean? What does beauty mean? I think there's a lot of different angles to unpack for that generation. So if you're a brand kind of looking to engage them, I would say think about more those minor nuances and less about the mass groupings of people together, but more how you can tap into some of those niche feelings and communities that Gen Z is all a part of, and how you can engage them on their own terms, really.
Yeah, it's their human experience. What is their human experience? And there's very little historical data to inform that. And you just gotta not assume. You have to put the work in to truly understand. And the tools are out there. Don't be on Be Real because it's cool. Understand why they're on Be Real and what it's doing for them, and then respect that, right?
Yeah.
Know where they are, understand them, and respect them.
Okay, let's wrap it up, Gen Z. We love you more every day.
Okay, we just want to be you. Have a great week.
Happy International Women's Day. We will see you all soon.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Two Marketeers Podcast. New episodes launch every 2 weeks.
Find the Two Marketeers Podcast on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, or wherever you like to listen. And be sure to rate and subscribe.
Listen on our website, the2marketeers.ca, or you can ask Alexa to play the Two Marketeers podcast.
Want to keep in touch? Follow the Two Marketeers on LinkedIn or at Two Marketeers on TikTok. We've always got something to share.
This podcast is over.